Hello, everyone. It's great to be back at CPAC Live after a much-needed vacay with the family. Great to be back with you, and we have another great show in store for you. We're going to be joined first by a great crusading conservative congressman, Congressman Barry Loudermilk, who has an ACU rating of 95%, one of the best ones we have in the House of Representatives. And we'll also be joined by Tom Bevan, who is the co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics. Tom has a great website, which you should really go to every morning now that so many of us don't go to Drudge anymore. And you should look at what's going on with the media coverage of this kind of chaotic moment in our nation's history and the ridiculous coverage of politics in this country. Tom and I are going to have a conversation about that. And then we're going to be joined by Ian Walters, our communications director, to discuss the president's epic speech on July 3rd and another one on July 4th, and why those themes are so important. But as I said, we're going to start off with the most important piece of news, which is it's my mother's 80th birthday. Sue Schlapp turns 80 years old today. My mom is my hero. She acted as my mom, and in many ways, my father. She did a great job raising 4 kids. And Mom, shout out to you. Happy birthday. Now we're joined by Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Barry, are you there, Congressman?
I'm here.
It's great to be with you, sir. Thanks for all the great work you do. Let me ask you first, what's it like now that Nancy Pelosi's turned the House of Representatives into a bit of a part-time job?
It's turned into a part-time job, but yet it's a 3-ring circus when we're there. So Nancy Pelosi seems to be the ringmaster of this 3-ring circus that we have going on. You know, the only thing she's bringing us there to do is to vote. And because of the new procedures that we have, they split us up into groups, and we end up, it takes forever to vote on any piece of legislation. And so, you know, it's totally different. I think there's a lot that we can do to improve. Look, you know, we waste a lot of time in Washington, D.C. as it is.
Sure.
And so by her keeping everyone away, she's pretty much totally in charge, and she's controlling her message. She doesn't have the other distractions by AOC. But what's interesting is when we are there, the Republicans are there. You got a number of the Democrats that aren't there. And there's some Democrats that have not been back to Washington, D.C. since the beginning of March. And so they're doing all this proxy voting now. It's really crazy. But on the other sense, with Nancy Pelosi as the ringmaster and the Speaker of the House, there's less damage being done because there's less work being done on the House side.
But what you're really saying, Congressman, is that Nancy Pelosi is all in on whatever it takes to take down Trump. There's really no legislating going on.
No.
And the only bit of legislating you can see is their desire to spend more and more and more money on, you name the topic, so that they can, kind of like foment this chaos and have even more deficit spending.
Yeah, and it's not just even the spending money, it's where they're directing the money. And then when there is something that needs to be addressed, like the police reform, you had Tim Scott's bill that they couldn't even get a vote in the Senate because the Democrats basically the Democrats filibustered the bill. I have met with the police chiefs in my district. We had 16 in this meeting that we got together. They 100% supported Tim Scott's bill. They were 100% against Nancy Pelosi's bill. Even with her there and Kevin McCarthy there and several Republicans there, they refused to bring us to the table to actually come up with something that is needed, that is good. Instead, they passed something that is inevitably trying to bring Trump down or trying to hold on to the majority or to win more races. You see that in police reform. They'll throw our law enforcement under the bus for political gain. You see it in elections. They keep trying to mandate mail-in ballots across the nation. They keep setting the entire election system up so they can take advantage of it. This is all about the November election to them. It's nothing about governing.
So Mike Lee went to the floor of the Senate last week to simply do one thing, and that is to call out, have a sense of the Senate to call out the lawlessness and the violence associated with these riots. He couldn't even get many other senators to stand up and support that simple notion. What's happening in the city of Atlanta and other places in Georgia due to this kind of like almost reverence for the need to have an outlet for the mob to create acts of violence. What's happening down there?
Well, most of anything that's going on is in the city of Atlanta because of a very liberal left-wing mayor. It was a little over a year ago she declared Atlanta a sanctuary city. So that kind of gives you an idea of where she is.
Which means basically criminals can get the protection of hanging out in a big city like Atlanta. And really, it's almost like a wanton ability to commit more crimes.
Right. And so because the governor has responded strongly in certain instances, you haven't seen an outbreak in outlying areas like you have in other cities. But we have seen violence. The state trooper headquarters was attacked over the weekend. Stone Mountain, a group of armed vigilantes wearing black, stormed into the park in supposedly protest of the Confederate memorial that's engraved on the side of the mountain there. But they came bearing ARs. Now, just think back a year or two ago, all right? The Democrats were totally against these assault weapons, these deadly assault weapons. But they're saying nothing at this point about armed vigilantes storming into a state park. And so the governor has said if the city of Atlanta doesn't get control over these mobs and the violence that's going on, he will intervene. And so I saw it not too long ago, it's maybe about 3 weeks ago, with the incident at the Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks was killed as they were trying to take him into custody. Some violence broke out. A group of protesters went up on the interstate where Interstate 75 and 85 converge in downtown Atlanta, and they blocked the interstate. That did not last very long. The governor called in the state patrol. They joined in with City of Atlanta police, and in a very short amount of time, not only did they clear the interstate, but they had a bus that they were loading up protesters or those that were involved in the riot on the bus and hauling them to jail. So this show of force is mitigating some of that, but it's also showing the people of Georgia that at least in some areas, we're going to protect their rights, and we're just not going to let these mobs take over.
And we have all these questions around race relations and racial animosity. I think one of the saddest things upon reading a lot of news today is so many young Black kids were killed this holiday. When the police are under attack and there's unrest in the streets and crime goes mostly unchecked, there's some tender victims. I mean, when you talk to your constituents, this is a sad moment.
It is. And look, the people in Atlanta, I've got a small portion of Atlanta in my district, but it goes from the northern part of Atlanta up into very rural Georgia. But the people I talk to in Atlanta, they are very upset with the mayor. They're very upset with the police chief because of the number of police officers that have resigned, that have gone to work somewhere else, that are calling in sick, that are taking early retirement because they have no faith in the leadership in the city because of what happened to the officer who was very quickly judged without his due process that's awarded to him to the Constitution. And outlying police departments, many of them are saying, we're not going to send our officers into the city of Atlanta or into that county because of that DA. We cannot guarantee that our officers' rights will be protected with that rogue DA wanting to rush to judgment with the Atlanta police officer. And so the citizens are very upset with the way the leadership of the city of Atlanta has gone, not backing their police department, but more so siding with some of the rioters. And it makes no sense to me that because the incident that's under investigation took place in a Wendy's parking lot, that you burn down the Wendy's, which is one of the few restaurants in your community. Those types of things I don't understand.
But do you get a sense from the people you represent, the people of Georgia, that they just feel like America is at a critical tipping point, asking fundamental questions about, like, can we love our country? Is it a good country? Should we celebrate the 4th? Or do we scrap it all?
You know, there is some of that, but a lot of the feelings of pride of America was renewed on Independence Day and throughout the weekend. I had the opportunity to speak at a couple of church services, and you could tell that just talking about the heritage of our nation and those core beliefs of our founders, that all of us are created equal and we're endowed by God with rights. And when God gives you those rights, nobody got this cancel culture out there. They can't cancel my rights because they didn't give it to me. The only time that they can cancel me is if I'm really concerned about what they say or they think. And so it's also an opportunity for us to unify. I've started engaging. I've always been engaged with churches in our district, including the black churches, but that's been taken to another level. That we're starting to get together and getting the various churches together because, quite frankly, as John Adams told us when he was the second president, that we have no government armed to fight against humans who are driven by greed and ambition that are not constrained by morality. Then he said our Constitution is for religious and moral people. It's wholly inadequate for any other. What he's saying is when you have a moral society, then you can have a free society. It only exists when you have a common set of morals that bind you together, because when people are moral, they don't tend to violate the rights of other people. But an immoral society takes advantage of it, and they continually do that. And you can never have a government that is a free and limited government strong enough to constrain that. He said it would be like a whale just going through a net, that the cords of our Constitution could not hold that back. And we're seeing that right now. And so the churches are really on the forefront of this, bringing the communities together, because I've said many times, the strength of a community is the size of the church, not the size of the courthouse.
When I think of what's going on specifically with the black experience in America, minorities, immigrants, especially, folks that have come here recently, there are two institutions that are probably the most important for their success and their ability to get the next step up on the economic ladder. The first one is strong families. Mm-hmm. The second one is the churches in those communities. And you speak specifically of the black churches. I mean, this is a real anchor to the community. Why would anybody fund groups that would intimate that somehow the family or the church is an old kind of notion that needs to be wiped away?
A lot of it is just education, that they're moving on emotion, and that's the conversation that we're having with the churches right now. Is we got to understand each other, but you also have to understand the history and the background and what is the underlying philosophy of the organization. They may be fighting for something right now that you think is honorable, but when you go look at the platform or the underlying ideology, it's totally counter to everything that you believe. And that's why the churches need to be on the forefront of this cultural revolution, or bringing Americans together, because there's a lot of work we need to do in racial relations here. And I've got a lot of friends that are African American, and they do feel that they're not treated equally, especially when it comes to law enforcement and some other things. And so there's some bridges we've got to mend, and you're not going to do that through groups that are resorting to violence, that are really, it's brought a bad light upon something that needs to be done. And that's why the churches need to be on the forefront. But it's education. It's just like all these statues that people are railing against. Abraham Lincoln statue in Lincoln Park, the Emancipator. They think it's a racist statue. Well, they don't know the history behind it. They don't know why that statue was built the way that it is. They don't know the people that they're railing against. Thomas Jefferson, yes, he did own slaves, but he admitted that it was an ill. He just didn't know how to get out of it. And he spoke continuously about that would be the one thing that destroys our union is slavery if we don't get out from under it. And so you look at the Jefferson Memorial. One wall of that is dedicated to his abolitionist side, his stance against slavery, saying that it is an evil and it cannot withstand God's justice. But yet they want to tear down the statues of Thomas Jefferson.
No, that's exactly right. In studying our history, we have a better chance not to repeat the horrible aspects of it. Barry Loudermilk, we appreciate everything you do in the halls of Congress. We have one request, that you never give Nancy Pelosi your proxy vote, which I know we don't have to worry about that. We appreciate all you do in Congress, and thanks for being with us on CPAC Live.
Well, thank you, Matt. I will never give anyone my proxy vote, and I wish a happy birthday to your mom.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, sir. We're going to go right now to a great clip from the president's really, I think, amazing speech in front of Mount Rushmore, and we'll be right back on the other side talking with Tom Bevan.
Dangerous movement, protect our nation's children, end this radical assault, and preserve our beloved American way of life. In our schools, our newsrooms, even our corporate boardrooms, there is a new far-left fascism that demands absolute allegiance. If you do not speak its language, perform its rituals, recite its mantras, and follow its commandments, then you will be censored, banished, blacklisted, persecuted, and punished. It's not going to happen to us. Make no mistake, this left-wing cultural revolution is designed to overthrow the American Revolution.
Love that clip of the president at Mount Rushmore. What an amazing speech. And we're joined now by the co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics, a must-go-to everyday website, Tom Bevan. Tom, thanks for joining us on CPAC Live.
You bet, Matt. Great to be with you.
So were you able to capture or to watch some of the president's speech at Mount Rushmore? And if you were, what's your take?
Well, I actually did not see the speech. My family gathered around. We watched Hamilton, and we started at about 7 o'clock, and it was 3 hours long. So at 10 o'clock, everybody went to bed. I got up the next morning, and I read news reports of the speech, and I saw in the New York Times, they said he had exploited race and culture to sow division. The Washington Post had a headline, something about white supremacy. Even the AP said something about, Trump promoting racism. I thought, oh my God, what in the heck did he say? So I went and read the transcript, and I didn't watch the whole speech, but I watched clips of the speech and read the full transcript. And I was actually, amazed that that's how it got reported by the news outlets. I mean, again, you may not like Trump, and certainly there were a lot of people, opinion writers, who wrote, we carried some of that commentary on Real Clear Politics. But as far as the news stories go, I was amazed at the level of editorializing that went along with his speech. I didn't find it to be racist or inclusive. I thought it was actually very inclusive and one of his better speeches.
Yeah, I think it really struck a chord, I know, with me, and I know with a lot of people I talked to. It was almost exactly, I remember tweeting out after the speech, it almost captured where I think a majority of Americans are as they watch things that they were taught as young children to revere and respect be ripped down with almost an applause from so many elite aspects of our culture and society. And so there's a real quaking in the spirit, I think, for a lot of Americans, that they're wondering, what's happening to their country. You do a lot of work on Fox and on TV, being somewhat critical or being an observer of the way the news handles moments like this. Do you think this is another irresponsible moment where their Trump hatred is getting in their way of having any really aspect of journalism?
I mean, honestly, as I just said, I do think it was really sort of the coverage, again, by the news. These are the main reporters: Maggie Haberman, Andy Carney of the New York Times, Robert Costa of the Washington Post. These are supposed to be their objective reporters. Again, on the editorial page, that's a different story. And we had we carried an op-ed from this morning from the New York Times, Charles Blow, progressive writer, who said he thought that, the speech embodied white supremacy. That's fine. That's his opinion. But as far as news goes and the news coverage, CNN, for example, the way that they handled it, was for me another example of how I think the media is really broken when it comes to just sort of reporting the facts on Donald Trump and sort of, what he was saying. And it's not their job to sort of interpret his message or try and find, make these sort of assessments about what he was saying. Just read the text and report on what he said. But to your point, Matt, I think this is Donald Trump's bet for the election, is that a majority of Americans do feel what he was expressing in that speech. And really, in a matter of a few short weeks, we've gone from the event that started this whole thing, the George Floyd incident, where there was a real cry about police brutality, excessive use of force, need for police reform, to where we are now, which is a completely different political landscape, where we're having monuments torn down, we're having not fringe characters, people like Tammy Duckworth, who may in fact be Joe Biden's vice president, on national television saying we need to actually engage in the argument of whether we should be pulling down George Washington's monument. So there is now a debate about sort of the fundamental values of the country, whether you think this is a great country that's flawed but moving in the right direction and has made good on its promise, the ideals that were declared in the Declaration of Independence, or whether you think that the country sort of fundamentally never able to get past its original sin of slavery, remains a racist, oppressive place. And that's kind of where we are. Trump's betting on one side, and Joe Biden's, hasn't really taken a stand on the other side, but he's going to have to, I think, as this election gets going.
So you have Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, these other luminaries on the left have gone to Mount Rushmore in the course of the last several years. And you can literally find CNN tapes, MSNBC tapes, New York Times articles, Washington Post articles, with a glow lauding them for their majesty and their words around their reverence for this monument. Trump goes there and he's inciting race riots.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of issues. I mean, one is just Trump in general. I mean, Trump is uniquely polarizing, sort of uniquely divisive. The Democrats have hated him even from before he took office, and really their passionate hatred of him really hasn't stopped. And so anything that he does, they're against, and the media has been against, and it's portrayed that way. But the other piece of that story, though, is how far the Democratic Party has moved to the left in just a few short years, right? Where, again, the tape of Bernie Sanders talking at Mount Rushmore, talking about how great it makes him feel, and it's great to be an American, to now people, again, not just fringe characters, but members of the Democratic Party saying this is stolen land, those are slave owners, this is not something that we should be revering or celebrating. It should be something that we should be tucking these folks away in museums and not lauding them in public. So it's a combination of Donald Trump on one hand, but it's also it signifies how far the Democratic Party, at least parts of it, have moved just in the last couple of years.
Well, I think nothing demonstrates that more than the language you hear out of so many of these big city mayors, Chicago, New York City, all across the country, and this defund the police movement. Mayor de Blasio pulling out $1 billion out of the New York police budget, getting rid of whole divisions of law enforcement. And on top of that, I was reading your Twitter feed today, you've had this spike in violence. And you see when the cops are pulled back, there's a lot of victims when criminals step in to the void. And a lot of those victims are Black.
Yeah, and look, I'm in Chicago, and it's been this way for a long time. It's sort of this just grinding, desensitizing. Every day you wake up, you go to the front pages and see, 10 shot, 20 shot, 5 dead, 10 dead. I mean, it's just never ending. It was that way. It's been that way for a number of years. Rahm Emanuel tried to handle it, but it has gotten worse here just in the last few months. I mean, we've had the bloodiest last few months that we've had in Chicago in a long time, including the bloodiest day we'd had in 60 years back over Memorial Day weekend. But Memorial Day weekend, Father's Day weekend, July 4th weekend, horrific violence. The total just from the last 3 days was, I think, 79 shot and 14 killed, including a 7-year-old girl. The week before that, it was a 3-year-old boy. Again, confined to the minority parts of the city, the south side, the west side. They are the ones who are suffering and paying the price for this increase in violence. And it doesn't get, it's so frustrating, Matt, because it doesn't get any headlines. There aren't really any protests. There isn't a spotlight shined on this. There have been more people killed in Chicago just in the last few weeks than the number of unarmed Black men that were killed by the police, not only in 2019, but probably in 2018, 2017. And yet and I'm not trying to minimize that issue. It's important. It needs to be dealt with, but put in perspective, that becomes the national focus and spotlight. And yet day in and day out, week in and week out, we have these horrific numbers coming out of, and this is only Chicago. I mean, as you mentioned, it's happening in other cities around the country too. And there's no focus on it. There's no effort to solve the problem. There's no discourse about it. And it's frustrating. The
one theme I see, besides some similar policies, this attempt to almost like defund the very parts of government that can help protect people, respond to 911 calls, these first responders, a lot of gun control so that criminals have guns, but people who are the victims of criminals oftentimes can't arm themselves and protect themselves. And just like you said, a very extreme socialist, Marxist bent to so many of these Democrats who run these big cities. And it seems like they're moving left. The question for you, you're still living there. I'm sure you've got a lot of friends there. Are you seeing a lot of people starting to move away from these big cities? Anecdotally, I'm talking to a lot of people in New York City who are just literally scared for their security. Or do you find there's a lot of people that are going to hang in there in the Chicago area and try to elect politicians that will at least be more sensible about these questions?
It doesn't seem that way. I mean, certainly the trend over the last couple of years, not only for the state of Illinois, but for the city of Chicago, has been a mass exodus. And that has to do not only with, I think, the issues in the urban center, but also more broadly, we've got a fiscal mess on our hands here. Property taxes are going up, unfunded pension liabilities. That's the same you'll find in New York State. The tax burden is also driving folks away. And we've had people moving locally to Indiana, to Iowa, to Wisconsin, but even more broadly to the Sun Belt and just getting out of the Midwest altogether. So there's not a lot of sense of, people really want to, and people, even people who come there and say, I love Chicago. It's a great city. It is a great city. It's got a great history. It's a very livable city. There are plenty of things to commend about it, but it has been, we've been suffering for a number of years, and there just doesn't seem the political will. And as you mentioned, I mean, it's been a one-party town for a long, long time, and whether you have one-party rule that's Republican or Democrat, I mean, that's not a good thing when you don't have both parties engaged and really having that sort of commitment to try and come up with solutions that work. That I think you end up having a situation like you do here, which is Republicans feel completely shut out of the process. They're not really invested in, or they're not able to make their voices heard. And so I think we're going to continue to see an exodus, not only from the city of Chicago, but from the state of Illinois in the coming days and weeks, months and years.
As you said, Tom, is the fact that it's hard to get media coverage on all of these murders, all these deaths, all this violence, unassociated with some of this, terrible rioting in response to what I believe was the murder of George Floyd, but just like this everyday, continual, nonstop violence, it's hard to get coverage of it. You're somebody who stepped into the media landscape, helped found Real Clear Politics, which is a website where all Americans can go and get thoughtful views on the left, thoughtful views on the right, a lot of reporting in the middle. It's kind of like old school. It's a throwback where you can actually, if you want to say what conservatives are saying. Are you at all hopeful that our democracy, that our republic, that this piece of it, this idea that you have a vibrant, free press that isn't so politicized, so in bed with one side or the other, and specifically when it comes to our national media, they're all on one side, it's the left side, 98% of them. Is there a way to fix this, or does it all have to just kind of like be scrapped and we start over with sites like your site and try to build on new sites?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the issue of violence in cities is one that, and just take for Chicago as an example, I mean, it was Barack Obama's hometown. He was president for 8 years. I mean, what better opportunity to bring a national spotlight to it?
His chief of staff became the mayor for 8 years.
Right, exactly. And yet there wasn't the real, the political, I mean, quite frankly, it's a complicated problem. It requires difficult conversations about the causes of what's going on in some of the inner cities. And some of that stuff is uncomfortable for, Democratic mayors, those conversations to have. And quite frankly, the other piece of it, and you've got, there would be actually support for it. And Trump has mentioned the sending in the National Guard and just actually putting people on street corners with, law enforcement officials so that kids can actually ride their bikes in the street and play, and, parents can let their kids go outside without feeling and worrying that they're going to, get shot. I mean, that's how it is now in some places in the city, but there hasn't been the political will to do that, or those two things. And as a result, it just, that one of the mantras of the media, and this has been true for a long, long time, is if it bleeds, it leads. And so we do get news stories about it on a local level, but it's never risen to sort of this national crisis in the same way that, for example, the George Floyd incident has made this a national discussion, a national debate. about police reform. It's being tackled in Congress. It's being tackled by the media. It's being tackled by leaders across the political spectrum. But urban violence, again, it's been going on for decades in cities, but it just never, for whatever reason, it has never risen to that level. And it's a shame because, as I said, more people are dying day in and day out in our cities around America than they are from a lot of the things that are getting a lot more attention.
Well, the last time the far left ran almost every major city, eventually people got tired of the crime and they got tired of the fact that investors started leaving these cities. I don't wish these cities any harm. I went to school right outside of Chicago, but the professors of the university where I went, many of whom used to live in Chicago, they don't feel like it's safe enough to live there anymore. We all see what's happening in New York City, a really great city that both my parents were born in. And now people just feel like it's broken. So I think we got to try new policies. Can't keep doubling down on the things that aren't working. We got to have strong families. We got to have strong institutions. We have to have strong churches. We have to have places where people who are struggling in life can go to get the help and support they need. And that can't always be government because that doesn't always work.
Right. And again, I mean, there's, it's economic opportunities. Another piece of it, school choice would be another real benefit for a lot of folks. So
let's try it. I mean, the president just took another step. The Supreme Court upheld a big piece of this. Let's let these kids pick the best possible schools. It would go a long way. Yeah.
Well, we'll see if that happens. I mean, again, it's one of the problems that I think Democrats have as they look for police reform examples, the police unions are very, very strong. Same thing with the teachers unions. I mean, the unions have been in some ways a real impediment to getting any progress, getting anything done other than sort of maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, that's right. But I love the idea that they want us to be able to sue cops for any kind of problems in society, which I have some problems with, obviously, because people won't sign up to be cops. They never talk about the ability to sue bad teachers who don't teach our kids in some of these institutions. So we're having a big conversation, and we need to make a lot of changes. Tom Bevan with Real Clear Politics. Thanks for being with us on CPAC Live. We love the work you do. Keep it up. I enjoy going to your website every day. I love looking at the polls. I'm kind of a poll junkie. So anyway, thanks for being with us, Tom. We're going to be right back to CPAC Live after this short break.
In so doing, they would destroy the very civilization that rescued billions from poverty, disease, violence, and hunger, and that lifted humanity to new heights of achievement, discovery, and progress.
Welcome back to CPAC Live. As I said, we're joined by Ian Walters. Ian, that was a great speech on July 3rd at Mount Rushmore.
I enjoyed it very much, and I appreciated you talking with Tom Bevan, having a substantive conversation about what's really going on in American cities, because I can't find it in the news. In fact, speaking of that Mount Rushmore speech, Breitbart pulled this up over the weekend. In 2008, CNN talks about Barack Obama going to Mount Rushmore. He's campaigning in South Dakota. He arrived there late last night, got a good look around Mount Rushmore. It's quite a sight if you haven't seen it. More CNN. He got a good glimpse of the majestic Mount Rushmore. It'll be a great backdrop for President Obama's speech. And all of a sudden, we've got this President Trump over there this weekend, and it's a completely different take from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, saying that this was a speech about divisiveness and racism. I've been going through the transcript. I haven't been able to find it, Matt Schlapp.
No, exactly. It's the opposite of that. And what he's trying to explain to all of us who love America and who are patriots, it's the creation of this great republic in America actually is the best example of any time on earth when more human beings were able to flourish. I think about my ancestry. You can think about your ancestry. Almost all of us, not all of us, but almost all of us came here with nothing or next to nothing. And the people here welcomed our family members with open arms. And if you made responsible individual choices, you could really have a great life. I mean, my Irish ancestors didn't come with very much in their pocketbooks, but they were accepted. And this is a beautiful thing about America that continues to this day, which was part of the speech, was this: we are more accepting. We allow more people to come here. We give more opportunities because we don't believe in socialism. We don't believe in fascism. We don't believe in the centralized government telling you everything you can do and everything you must do. And it results in human flourishing. And based on the dignity of each person.
It is this idea that we are all created equal and in God's vision. From President's speech, no nation has done more to advance the human condition than the United States. He goes on after extolling the virtues of our founding, which should be celebrated on July 4th, to go after the woke folks on the left. He says there's a growing danger that threatens every blessing our ancestors fought so hard for, that they bled to secure. Our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, and talked about cancel culture and why that's bad, why that limits people's voice to speak freely, a hallmark of American democracy, but also talked about the progressivism. You've been talking about this, the progressivism that's happening in boardrooms, the progressivism that's happening in academic institutions.
Foundations, big foundations.
That schools and now corporate America are becoming re-education camps. Like, you better check the boxes, or else you're not going to be able to participate in America anymore. Is the American experiment in peril?
Look, this is fascism. When the big, powerful institutions go to people that have to work for those institutions or have to buy those products, when they're doing thought police experiments on them, when the people's views, it's not necessarily the question of combating racism, it's the question of combating the idea that you love your country, that you want to fly your flag, that you believe you might go to a church that's Bible-based, and you believe strongly in those issues. But if they can call those strongly held religious views hate speech, well, then there's no more debate. There's no more conversation. I remember I was a history major in college. I remember spending a lot of time on the French Revolution. Our American Revolution stands in stark contrast with the French Revolution. The French Revolution was characterized, yes, it was anti-elite, but it was all about the angry mob, and different pieces of the mob would gain leadership in something like a chop. And it became quite random as to who could make the cut and who couldn't make the cut. And the guillotine chopped off the heads of a lot of people. Isn't it ironic that on these statues, they're chopping off the heads of the statues of some wonderful people who lived their lives in a way that allowed America to be where it is? You don't have to love every part of history. There are parts of history we should edit in the sense of what we revere and what we hold up as lessons. But we ought to learn every aspect of it, because if we don't learn every aspect of it, we're going to repeat it, and we're going to repeat those bad aspects. And that's the worst part of fascism, is it chills the ability to have a real free-flowing debate.
One last comment for you. You brought up the mob in the French Revolution. That was blood and death in the streets. One of the unfortunate byproducts of what we're witnessing now. Just over the weekend, 79 folks shot in Chicago, 15 dead, a 7-year-old child is a part of that, a 14-year-old in Chicago, an 8-year-old in Atlanta. At one incident in Atlanta, 14 people were shot at one gathering. In D.C., we lost an 11-year-old young man. New York City, 44 shootings, 63 victims. There is an uptick in crime as a result.
And who are the victims of that crime? A lot of people of color. And I would just say that if you're out there and you're a decent American, like so many millions and millions and millions of people are in this country, and you're looking at this violence, Ian, I keep saying it, which is take pride in your country, put your flag out, specifically pray for this country. If you're a believer, ask God to continue to bless this country and to be with us in this struggle. And understand, if you want to combat racism, which we all do, and the great team here is encouraging us to fight racism and not America. But if you really believe in fighting racism, stop this chaos in these cities and in the urban core, because the victims of so much of this violence are young people of color, and they're going to lose their economic futures if investors pull out because they're afraid of their security. This is a dire moment in our history. We can get through it. We're going to persevere, but we've got to stand up and start doing right.
It's good to have you back at the anchor's desk, Matt Schlapp.
It's good to be alongside you, Ian. Thanks for joining us on CPAC Live. We're going to be back at you on Wednesday and Friday with a couple of other great shows. The highlight of the week is going to be the fact that we're going to be joined once again by the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Eric Hargan. We'll see you soon.